Every book is conceived in a moment, and this book was conceived on a moment in December of 2007 when I was out for a hike with a friend, and it was the kind of light when you feel like you can say anything because nobody in the world is listening. And we were just hiking along, and all of a sudden my friend turned to me and said, "Have you ever done anything you really, really regret?" And I didn't even have to think about it for a second. Immediately I said, when I was in my 30s, I accused my father of sexually molesting me, and then I realized it wasn't true. And my friend stopped walking and turned to me with her mouth hanging open, and she said, "The same thing happened to me." In 1982, I started working for a feminist researcher whose study revealed the fact that 1 out of 3 American women had been victims of childhood sexual abuse. Suddenly, the whole culture flipped, and the belief switched from incest is a 1 in a million crime to there's a perpetrator hiding behind every bush, there's an incestuous father in every household, there's an incest survivor in almost every woman. And as a result of that, a whole bunch of charges started being brought. The worst thing about it, of course, was realizing that it was true. The only good thing about it was that I had spent the past many years wondering, and now I had this great feeling of certainty. So once I realized it was true, I had to tell my family, and the person it was hardest to tell was my mother. And in that instant, for the next 30 seconds, I had with my mother what I had been wanting all my life. I finally had my mother's love. The impact of my accusation on my family was very intense. It effectively divided my family into 2 warring factions. There were those who believed me and those who didn't. This whole thing was a nightmare. It was a nightmare believing that my father had molested me, and it was a nightmare, I have to say, of equal proportion, really. It was just as hard the moment I realized that it wasn't true. You know, it's this weird balance in telling this story between wanting to, number one, get myself off the hook, of course, can't be avoided, and it's impossible, and also wanting to explain how this happened, how it happened to me, how it happened to tens of thousands of other women. And as I talk to you this way, I feel like I'm trying to say at once, I did something terrible. I need to take responsibility for that. I feel like the world is divided into 2 groups of people, those who say I screwed up and I'm sorry, and those who won't, and I want to be in the former group. So I went to see my father to beg him to hear my apology. And what happened when I got there was something I never would have predicted.
How much of a role have false memories played in the public perception of the famous Duggar family, the Institute in Basic Life Principles, or IBLP, and its founder, Bill Gothard? I found that some allegations against them that have spread far and wide in the public were actually repressed memories, and all had a profound effect on the entire scandalous situation.
So what the scientific work on memory distortion is revealing about the nature of memory is that it is malleable. It's not something that's fixed. It's subject to distortion or change or exaggeration, and that's why we talk about the malleable nature of memory.
For the past 1.5 years or so, I've been investigating the allegations of abuse that were presented in the docuseries on Amazon Prime called Shiny Happy People, Duggar Family Secrets. I started by looking into the lawsuit that was filed by multiple women against IBLP, the Christian organization the Duggar family participated in, and Bill Gothard, its founder, called Wilkinson versus IBLP. The women claimed that they were molested and harassed by Gothard decades earlier. Each woman was asking for a judgment of $400,000 per person, totaling millions overall. As I looked deeper, I found that in this lawsuit, the allegations of abuse in IBLP, which the Shiny Happy People docuseries suggested related to the Duggar family scandals, claimed to be entirely based on repressed memories, and that this fact was not even mentioned in the program at all when the lawsuit was referred to. That was shocking to me. But interestingly, I have found that even though all of the claims in the lawsuit are supposedly due to repressed memories, not all of them in reality are. I'll explain that later. For now, I found out that repressed memories are when someone supposedly forgets or represses memories of abuse for many years and then recalls them later. How could that happen? Wouldn't a memory of something so terrible be harder to forget? How would that work exactly?
There's a common lay belief that memory works like a recording device. You just record the experience and later on you play it back, but that is not the way memory actually works. Memory is actually more of a constructive process. When we remember something, we're actually taking bits and pieces of experience, bringing them together to essentially construct what feels like an actual memory. So I like to say that memory works a little bit more like a Wikipedia page, because you can go in there and edit it, but so can other people.
There definitely is an epidemic of these accusations of sexual abuse coming from adults who claim that they have suddenly unblocked or recovered previously repressed memories, in which usually they're accusing a father, but it can be another male figure with the female being the accuser. That's the most common pattern, not the only one. And it's something that I've seen in my own work as a psychiatrist for the last 7 or 8 years, where initially people assumed that this was a legitimate thing, but in fact people who have been seriously abused in the kind of major ongoing ways that are being claimed don't forget such things. They may choose not to talk about it. They may feel that it's something that they cannot tell other people about. No one doubts that. But the evidence is overwhelming from both laboratory work as well as clinical work that people don't forget those kind of major traumas. If anything, they may have a problem with it being intruding upon them too much.
That would mean that memories of events are not always true. When I researched further into how memory works and put that together with the fact that these allegations were coming from women who claimed they had repressed these memories of abusive things happening to them for as long as 2 decades or more, something again seemed very wrong.
We get contaminated when we talk to other witnesses, when we're interrogated in a suggestive or leading manner. We get contaminated if we've seen say a high publicity event and then we see some newspaper or television coverage about that event. All of these situations provide an opportunity for new information to enter a witness's memory and cause a contamination, transformation, distortion, or even just a supplementation of the memory.
This information made me realize that this entire tower of supposed abuse and allegations of molestations could all be false. It is quite possible. That was hard to believe considering all the hype that surrounded the scandals, the repercussions that have resulted from them, and how no one is even investigating the truth or falsehood of all of this. After all, these women have been going around on the internet giving interviews about their experiences and are sometimes very emotional when they do it.
It makes me so, I go back and forth between extremely sad and extremely angry. I'm like, why? How hard is it? How hard is it to say this is true? These things happened. They were wrong.
Could it be that these memories are true and suddenly came upon all these women years later, all close to the same time, and that they were all accurate?
I told people about being raped as a young girl, and they didn't believe me.
Big smile.
Because I had blocked memories and they didn't think that was possible.
Sit back a little bit more. There we go. Perfect.
When we're in trauma, our left frontal lobe, that portion of our brain that holds the ability to think, to reason, goes offline. So anyone who's gone through sexual abuse will have a kind of fragmentation in their ability to think.
According to Dr. Allender, if we are abused, our memories become fragmented. But Dr. Loftus said fragmentation happens with all our memories anyway over time. We don't have to have any trauma for that to happen. Memories are fragmented generally. So how can they be relied upon to be accurate, especially after many, many years?
It's made me feel like I'm not whole, and I'm sick and queasy. Like my body is telling me there's more to the story, but I have no memory of anything more. The fear of the unknown. And I don't know how much unknown is in me.
The memories may be fragmented, but will you believe your body?
This doctor is saying if you have anxiety that makes you feel sick and have worries or other problems that you don't know where they came from or how to deal with them, you must have been abused or had some terrible trauma that you just can't remember. He suggests you have to bring out those traumatic memories in order to help in healing. But couldn't anxiety and depression just come about in normal people with normal problems who didn't have any trauma at all? This therapy idea suggests to think about all the things that you feel and think and let your body tell you how and what to think about your past.
And what comes next is the person say, well, you know, I know this is a lot, but let's continue to work. And in the meantime, I'll see you next week. But in the meantime, I'd like you to start keeping a journal. I'd like you to start keeping track of your dreams. I'd like you to start keeping track of your thoughts. I'd like to give yourself some time every day to just tune into your body and see if you get any images or sensations that might come up in any part of your body. Because sometimes people can have body memories where they actually begin through their body to remember in a way that we didn't know about till a few years ago, abusive experiences. And keep a track of those things, and when you come back, we'll see what you have.
When I looked up information about Dr. Dan Allender, the one who says our body will tell us if we have trauma or abuse in our past, I found he is a therapist with a divinity degree who specializes in sexual abuse recovery and relationship therapy. But his expertise is not in memory and how it works. His focus seems to be on finding trauma in one's past and assigning it to problems in the present. So he comes from the angle of seeing problems through the lens of believing a person has had trauma, which will explain everything about why they are unhappy, have depression, and feel anxiety in their life now. This approach to therapy, that problems today are due to repressed memories of past trauma, has been around for decades and been proven to plant false memories in the minds of patients with devastating consequences. It has led to many individuals and families being destroyed because patients come to believe they were abused when they never were. In fact, there have been numerous lawsuits against therapists for this very approach because of the damage it has done. This kind of therapy changes the perception of the patient to adopt negative beliefs and feelings about their loved ones or others who they had previously believed to be positive influences in their lives.
The first stage was to convince the people that in fact they had repressed memories. In the patients that I have represented, they even fought this. They say, no, I didn't. And the therapist would keep insisting, this is the explanation of your problem. This is the source of the problem. They would not go and treat the presenting problem. They had to go and handle the repressed memories. Then the next thing that they would do is start working on them in terms of recovering the memory.
But at that point, I began, perceiving my family differently. They became people who had the potential to hurt me, the potential to be evil, when I had never known that before. We had problems in our family, but I never perceived them as evil people. Every session was a trauma search.
I think it's absolutely an outrage from every point of view, from a scientific point of view, from a legal point of view, from an ethical point of view, from a mental health point of view. First of all, There is no such thing as recovered memory as it's being described by the movement of therapists who have created this.
So the very foundation of the therapy that Dr. Allender is suggesting, and it has clearly been done with some of these women, is very suspect to me when looking into the history of it. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, on the other hand, is a professor of psychological and cognitive science. She has studied how memory works for decades, done numerous experiments with false memories that can be duplicated, and has been involved in many criminal cases where repressed or false memories have been used to convict innocent people. So if memory is fragmented and malleable, and it also becomes more and more fragmented over time, wouldn't there need to be corroborating evidence to support these claims of abuse from years and years, even decades earlier?
Many people are just not aware of how many mistakes people can make, and when they are making a mistake and they're testifying, they can often be very detailed and very confident and even emotional in their testimony. One of the things that jurors are impressed with when they listen to a witness's testimony, if it's expressed with a lot of confidence, if it's expressed with a lot of detail, if it's expressed with emotion, the jurors tend to believe it more. But what we've shown is that people can be very confident about false memories, people can be detailed about false memories, people can be emotional about false memories. You need independent corroboration to know whether you are dealing with an actual memory or one that is a product of imagination, suggestion, or one of these other processes.
So it is clear that just the testimony of witnesses is not a reliable way to know what actually happened decades ago. Corroborating evidence needs to be there in order to show what is true. As I said before, there are several instances where repressed memories or false memories have been used to convict people in court, even with the testimony of several witnesses. And later, it was found that the convicted person or persons were innocent.
This was going on really all across North America and then other parts of the world. Families were being destroyed in the process because once people developed these memories, they then accused their family members or other relatives or other former neighbors or former teachers, former anybody.
If repressed or false memories can come about in healthy people, what are the factors that make this happen? And are those factors present in the circumstances of these women making these claims of abuse years after they supposedly happened? Before checking to see if there was corroborating evidence for their claims, I wanted to see if the factors that make up false memories are present in this case. After all, the court documents claimed their accusations were all due to repressed memories. I found through several sources that there are some basic factors that can create false memories. These factors don't even have to be present at all for a person or even a group to start to have false memories, because it can happen without any of these factors. But these factors can enhance the possibility of the creation of false memories. In fact, there was even a process by which researchers purposefully planted false memories in subjects to see how this all works. All the women in the lawsuit had all of the following factors. Number one, an atmosphere of trust or connection to another person or persons. In the case of the plaintiffs, their trust or connection began with others who had participated in IBLP. This happened through the internet at first. This website was created by a small group of friends who had formed with the sole purpose of destroying IBLP in Gothard because they did not agree with his teachings and were disgruntled about their own family upbringing. There's a lot of evidence from numerous sources that this website started women thinking a vast majority of their problems in their own lives now must have come from IBLP and Gothard. Here's just a couple of quick examples from two of the women who were in the lawsuit, and both of these women featured here had previously written numerous glowing letters of gratefulness and appreciation to Bill Gothard for his help in their lives, thanking him for his advice. Not long before they went on this website, and their memories began to change.
Shortly after I arrived home, from headquarters. I came across a website called recoveringgrace.org.
Recovering Grace was a community online for people to share their stories of the abuse that they experienced in ATI and their own personal stories of recovery. And it is where a lot of the momentum came about to push back against Bill Gothard for his sexual harassment.
On the front page, it was titled Sexual Harassment at Headquarters. On impulse, I jumped in the comment section and I said, hey, this is my story.
Systems. I know for me, I first began discovering and challenging the system because, one, I was desperate for some answers to why I was hurting so bad, what was happening. I was just at my wit's end as far as pain in my heart. I was crying out to God, and we all connected via, I believe, recoveringgrace.org, which is kind of where it all started.
There were literally hundreds of thousands of children raised in this program. Some are just now figuring out what exactly happened to them and just how wrong it was.
That last man talking there was one of the founders of the SLANDER's website I was referring to. There's quite a web connecting the two founders of the website, intertwined with this lawsuit and intertwined with the money they were hoping to win. I'll explain all of that later in this series. But notice he said, they are just now figuring out what happened to them and how it was wrong. In other words, many of these former IBLP participants didn't realize there was anything wrong with their experiences until they connected with others who have a perception of negative memory about it. Now they are figuring out what happened. All the women in the lawsuit had this same experience of connecting with each other by their collective past as IBLP participants through this website that was posting negative articles about the organization. After reading negative articles, their memories began to change. And then they perceived their experiences with Bill Gothard as negative experiences, when before reading these accounts, they did not feel that way. And that's what is happening here. And it doesn't just happen with the trust and connection through IBLP people, but it also comes from their trust of therapists.
The way that a person can end up being treated as a sexual abuse victim and manipulated into believing that they are of such a victim, despite the fact that they never have been sexually abused, never thought they were sexually abused, never came to therapy for that reason, starts with the orientation of the therapist. It has nothing to do with the patient. And this I've seen over and over again in my study of actual cases, studying the therapy records. Has nothing to do with the patient. You can have any type of mental problem, from a very serious one to a relatively minor one, depression, anxiety, phobias, sexual problem, drug problem, and that is that the therapist has an agenda. The therapist is all dressed up and ready to go on the subject of sexual abuse.
So that first factor of trust was present in all these cases. They had trust in other previous IBLP participants, and in most cases, they were in therapy and trusted their therapists. Number two, recollection or obsession over past events. When the women read a negative report about another person who was at IBLP headquarters, they began to think over and over again about their own experiences there. The testimony they read was disturbing and confusing to them, and several of them have described how they began to think obsessively about it because it really bothered them, and understandably so.
False memory OCD causes an individual to have obsessive thoughts around a memory or event, which in reality didn't actually happen. Psychotherapist John Hirschfield explains, the event can be something that actually happened, but over which there is some confusion, or it can be something completely fabricated by the mind. Experiencing these sorts of false memories can be super distressing for the individual. Typically, they'll spend a lot of time thinking about the memory, carrying out compulsions to try to cope with the memory, or to alleviate anxiety or guilt around having it. A great deal of time and focus will go into proving if the memory is real or false. Over time, the memory becomes more vivid as the individual feeds the memory by dwelling on it and giving it more attention.
From the interviews and testimonies of the women themselves, this happened. They dwelt on the experiences over and over again, trying to cope and figure out what really happened. Number 3, suggestion mixed with misinformation and emotion.
False memories can come from a few different places. Suggestion. Suggestion is super powerful. If someone asks you a specific question about an event or suggests a detail of the event was different to what you remember, your brain may change the memory accordingly. Misinformation. If someone convincingly shares incorrect information about an event, our memory might actually change. Inaccurate perception. If you perceive an event incorrectly, for example, if you can only hear and not see something, our brain will try to fill in the gaps of the memory. Misattribution. We've all experienced mixing up multiple memories. If we only remember small parts of certain memories, our brain may put them together into one memory, mixing up events in our minds. Emotions. Research has shown that negative emotions lead to more false memories than positive or neutral emotions. I can't stress enough how real these false memories feel.
Clearly, when the women read this negative account, they had very negative emotions. The suggestion these women read online was that a woman had been uncomfortable with her interactions with Gothard, and she attributed that feeling to harassment and abuse. The very suggestion that she had her own uncomfortable feelings and those equated to abuse was enough to plant the suggestion in the mind of the other women reading it that maybe what they had experienced was also abuse if they had any thought of being uncomfortable, and even if they didn't previously feel that way. So the suggestion was planted in the minds of women who many times otherwise had fond and happy memories of their time at the IBLP facilities. They had good relationships with Mr. Gothard as well. I know this because of personal letters, cards, and electronic communications they had with Mr. Gothard himself. Also from interviewing people who were there at the time, including friends and family members. Here's just a few examples of how the plaintiffs in the lawsuit didn't have any problem with Gothard or IBLP before they read the article suggesting abuse. Some of the plaintiffs mention in their accounts on the Recovering Grace website that these memories came about after repression, but others don't mention that in their articles. Yet all of the plaintiffs said they came to know they were abused because of repressed memories in court documents. Quote, "Honestly, I had no earthly idea what was happening between Bill Gothard and me during the time I spent with him at headquarters. I visualized dozens of encounters between him and me while reading her story. My memories are flooding back to me." Here's another one from one of the plaintiffs who wrote on Recovering Grace. "Someone wrote me 2 years ago asking me if the sexual harassment stories on Recovering Grace website were true. Recovering Grace? I'd never heard of it. I logged on and I read, and my whole life was changed. Reading those accounts was like reading my own history. Everything I had built my beliefs and friendships and trusts and memories on was swept away in one small yet gigantic 800 words or so. For the next year, I sought to get to the truth. In my search, I sought the help and advice of a professional counselor to walk me through the processing I would need to do to unravel my history, making sense of it and coming to terms with it." Another plaintiff's words on this website: "I repressed the memories of my father's abuse until after he died in 2006. At that time, a family member asked me if my father had abused me. At first, I denied that he had." This is just a few short excerpts that show what I'm talking about, but there are many more in the articles if you look for them. This fact, along with the court documents and interviews some of these women have given, makes it clear that many of them did not think they were abused at all until they read negative stories on this website and began interactions with the people who were trying to take down IBLP. Number 4, social pressure. This is so very clear with the women who participated in this lawsuit. Listen to how Dr. Coleman explains how this works.
So the impact on the patient is that they begin to put more and more of their energy into their new society. Their new society is the therapist and the peers that they have gained either through a group therapy or other contacts. Maybe they've gone to a conference that they've heard about. They sooner or later meet other people in the recovered memory movement. This becomes their new world. And they basically put all their chips down on that. This means that for them to ever really question whether they have been a victim of manipulation by the therapist is extremely difficult. Imagine the embarrassment, the humiliation for you to recognize that you falsely accused your parents of some horrendous things. Most people are not willing and will go then the rest of their life believing this and cut off from their families. From the point of view of the parents who are accused, it's devastating.
I can't have anything to do with my family because of the abuse that is still happening. Gothard permeated our entire family.
I've spent decades in therapy to undo the blame that was put on me for the abuse.
Say something that you need to believe about yourself, and if you say it, this whole group is going to repeat it.
I'm not responsible for the sins of others.
I am not responsible for the sins of others.
Once the women were in the group, so to speak, they have, in many of these cases, so sadly and tragically, completely separated from their families, leaned on each other for support in these memories, and even encouraged each other to come up with more details by listening to each other's stories and adding those details to their own. The women in the lawsuit even started to have a motto among them and bought bracelets to show their solidarity that said Kia Kaha, which means stay strong. They talked about how they were going to vacation together in New Zealand and where they would go and what they would do once they all got the money they were hoping to receive when the lawsuit was concluded. This kind of social pressure makes it very difficult for any of them to stop and think critically about even the possibility that they are now victims of false memories. This social pressure further solidifies the idea that they were abused by their churches, their families, by Bill Gothard, and some of them have accused their own fathers of sexual abuse, which they found through repressed memories. It would take a huge amount of bravery for any of these women to be willing to look at all this evidence and admit it once they discover that they have been deceived. There are several factors that would keep them from exploring this information. The social pressure in their group, the documentary that was already released on Amazon Prime, and another 2 are in the works now. They also went through trying to sue IBLP and Gothard with all the legal processes that takes. Several of them have done interviews galore on lots of podcasts all over the internet. There are even several of them who have created businesses based on the idea that they are abuse victims. Discovering and accepting that they are victims of repressed memories and memory manipulation would be very hard to do, regardless of the evidence. At this point, it is much easier to buckle down and defend what you have already publicly said.
That these are people who've been caught up in a network of manipulation and suggestion, most often through therapy with mental health professionals, although it can even happen outside of therapy through the many TV programs and books and articles and word of mouth, which is now spreading, which is giving people the idea that you may have been sexually abused even though you have no memory of it.
Back when this interview was done in the mid-1990s, the internet wasn't a thing. Now it is another very effective and very intrusive way people can believe things about other people, organizations, and relate those opinions and suggestions to their own experiences, which can affect their own memories. That can lead to all kinds of false accusations being believed and all kinds of slander being spread without any evidence being necessary or even sought out by those consuming it. And that slander can permeate the mind of the people who see it, which it absolutely has done. And podcasters love a salacious story. This is certainly salacious and will get them lots of clicks and likes and subscribers. All this adds to the social pressure these women have on them now. But I already know there is at least one plaintiff who has come to realize Bill Gothard did not hurt her or others. But she has not yet agreed to be identified. And I understand. There's a lot of pressure, and it is up to her if she ever wants to rectify her mistake publicly. I don't judge her for that. I understand it's very difficult and scary to come forward. Regarding corroborating evidence, because repressed memories are not believable, because the testimonies alone of witnesses cannot be relied upon to tell what really happened, it is clear that corroborating evidence is extremely important and needs to be presented to show if these memories being recalled, in some cases more than 2 decades later, have any basis in fact. And that is why I have found it very eye-opening and disturbing to investigate this entire situation, and found that there is no corroborating evidence at all for criminal sexual abuse or harassment. And in fact, there is a lot of evidence to the contrary. The journal entries I have read, personal interviews I have done with family and friends who were there at the time of these alleged incidents, looking at the interviews of the plaintiffs themselves, personal communications in the form of letters and cards sent to Bill Gothard himself from the plaintiffs and communications from their parents and family members, police reports and investigations into alleged sexual misconduct, looking at the scene of the incidents and putting the stories together with the logistics, and the additional information about repressed memories and the claims of the plaintiffs themselves all show that the stories of sexual abuse are not based in fact. But let me say this, not all have been based on false memories that have been unwittingly constructed in their minds. Some of these women are clearly victims of false memories, and in fact, so are their families who have been isolated from them due to this, and so is Bill Gothard, IBLP, and in turn the Duggar family. And yet, that's not the case with all of them. There are a couple who are purposefully lying. They are doing all this for personal gain. It becomes clear who is a victim of false memories and who is not when each of these claims and those who are telling them are specifically investigated. Some of that has already been revealed on this channel, and there will be more to come. As Dr. Coleman said, sometimes people in this situation choose to go the rest of their lives without being willing to look into the evidence of their own case and find that they are victims of false memories. It's easier for them just to keep these memories and stay in the group that supports them. But there are also people who are brave enough to discover the truth. One such person was Meredith Moran, who wrote the book, My Lie, A True Story of False Memory. She had to be very brave and courageous in the face of the public because she was already in the public eye when all this occurred. My hope is that these women will be as brave as Meredith, and the bravest will be the one who is first to go public with the truth once they discover it. I hope they will be brave enough to consider the evidence instead of relying on manipulated memories from years ago, the group they are now relying on, their feelings, or their therapist. When they do, it will likely cause a firestorm on the internet, and that's why they're afraid to even think about it. But it will be the start of the truth coming out and the real healing that needs to take place in their own families. If they are brave enough to go through the pain of false memories, they can be brave enough to look into the evidence that shows the truth and embrace it. Next time, these women have been caught up in the repressed memory movement without even realizing it. How has the Me Too movement, the definition of sexual abuse, and the internet played a role in their claimed victimhood? We will take a look at that next time. Before you go, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. The more people who are willing to do this, the more people will learn the truth of what's going on in this entire situation. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you here next time.